When you take your attention away from a narcissist, something profound happens inside their world, a world built on control, ego, and the constant need to be validated. When you finally choose silence over explanation, distance over reaction, and peace over engagement, they feel it like a sudden collapse of the structure they've built around you. They lose their sense of control. Not gradually, not slowly, but instantly, because their control never came from strength, it came from your participation. The moment you step out of that dynamic, you remove the foundation they were standing on, and they don't know how to balance on their own. Your silence becomes a force that breaks the illusion they crafted. Their entire identity depends on being the center of someone's attention, and when that attention is withdrawn, they experience an internal crisis. They begin asking themselves questions they never dared to face. What if I'm not in control? What if I'm not as important as I believe? What if they no longer fear losing me? These questions disturb them because a narcissist's sense of worth is not created from within. It is borrowed from the people around them. And once you stop supplying them with emotional energy, they face a void they cannot fill. At first, they don't understand what's happening. They're used to you responding, explaining, defending yourself, trying to fix things, trying to make peace, or trying to calm the chaos. They depend on these reactions because each one reinforces their power. When you stop reacting, you disrupt the cycle that served them perfectly. Silence is not just silence to a narcissist, it's rejection, punishment, and abandonment all at once. It triggers their deepest insecurity, the fear that they are irrelevant without someone to validate them. They feel powerless without your voice, and this loss of power fuels anxiety inside them. They start to lose the emotional upper hand, and this loss scares them more than anything else. The loss of control affects their behavior rapidly. They may start checking your social media, asking mutual friends about you, or even inventing stories in their own mind about why you aren't responding. They try to convince themselves that you're the problem, that you're confused, that you're weak, that you're emotional. They try to mentally reduce your value to maintain their sense of superiority. They cannot accept that silence is a choice you made for your well-being. They have to believe it is a reaction to them. A narcissist cannot imagine you having a life, peace, or clarity that does not involve them, so they rewrite the reality in their mind to protect their ego. But deep down, the fear remains, and the fear is simple. They are no longer in control. The loss of control is not just emotional, it's psychological. Narcissists operate from a place where they must dictate the tone, the pace, the narrative, and the outcome of every interaction. They need to know that they can pull you back anytime they want. When they lose the ability to influence your feelings, they feel a kind of inner collapse because it exposes their powerlessness. They realize that the control they thought they had was never real. It was an illusion, powered by your willingness to engage. And this realization shakes them. They begin to panic in ways they won't show openly. They may act confident, indifferent, or dismissive on the surface, but internally they feel the tension rising. They cannot admit this, even to themselves, because a narcissist's identity is built on the belief that they are always in control, always right, always adored, always obeyed. Losing control forces them to confront their own fragility, something they've spent their entire life avoiding. This loss pushes them into unpredictable behavior. They may attempt to pull you back with sweetness, apologies, sudden affection, or dramatic displays of emotion. If that doesn't work, they may switch to anger, blame, guilt, or accusations. This shift isn't random. It's a desperate attempt to regain the control that slipped through their fingers. They don't care which emotion brings you back. They only care that you return. They want to restore the feeling of power that your silence took away. And if none of these attempts work, they feel threatened in a way most people will never understand. For them, losing control is losing identity. They cannot exist without someone giving them emotional fuel, and when that source goes quiet, they feel empty, exposed, and unimportant. Your silence forces them to face the truth they've avoided their entire life. They cannot control someone who has chosen themselves. They cannot manipulate someone who will not respond. They cannot dominate someone who has reclaimed their inner power. And that is why your silence is so powerful. It breaks the invisible chains they kept around your emotions. It disrupts the unspoken agreement where you reacted and they controlled. When you stop talking, they lose not just your attention, but their ability to direct your life. They lose the script they relied on. They lose the emotional access they once abused. They lose the illusion of superiority they built over time. And in that loss, they feel the reality they fear most, a life where you no longer revolve around them, a life where your peace matters more than their presence, a life where your silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. When a narcissist realizes that you have stopped talking to them, they don't simply sit back and accept it. They feel the shift in energy immediately. And because their world revolves around maintaining dominance and securing attention, they cannot tolerate silence. The absence of your voice becomes a threat, a disruption they need to undo as quickly as possible. This is when they begin creating chaos, not because they are confused, but because chaos is their tool for regaining control. They know that if they can stir your emotions, provoke a reaction, or create uncertainty, they can pull you back into the dynamic you walked away from. Chaos becomes their attempt to regain the center of your mind, because if they can dominate your emotional state, they can dominate your decisions again. The moment peace enters your life, they feel it slipping away. And their instinct is to shake that peace until you feel unstable enough to return to them. They may start with subtle disruptions, small actions designed to get your attention. A sudden message, a missed call, a question that seems harmless on the surface but carries an emotional hook. They want to test if you are still reachable, still vulnerable, still willing to respond. When silence meets these attempts, they escalate. Narcissists thrive on emotional reaction, and when they don't get it, they turn to strategies that can bring out shock, confusion, or frustration. They may spread rumors, involve mutual friends, or create situations that force your name into conversations. They may suddenly accuse you of things, twist your past words, or create dramatic stories to make you feel obligated to defend yourself. These tactics are not random. They are engineered to break your calm, because they know the moment you react, they have regained emotional access to you. Chaos is their weapon because they cannot win in clarity. If you are calm, thinking logically, or observing their behavior with awareness, they lose the upper hand. So they create emotional storms that blur your judgment. They want you to question your choices, doubt your boundaries, and feel unsure about your silence. They want to overwhelm you with enough confusion that you step out of your peace and into their drama. They know that emotional chaos weakens people, and weakened people return to familiar patterns. They count on your empathy, your history with them, your memories, and your desire to avoid conflict. They will use every soft spot, every old wound, every insecurity you ever shared with them to pull you back toward them. Sometimes the chaos appears in the form of sudden emergencies. They may claim they're going through something devastating, hoping you'll break your silence out of compassion. They may pretend they're hurt, sick, or in deep trouble. They may even use guilt, "How can you ignore me when I need you most?" to manipulate your sense of responsibility. Narcissists know that your emotional heart is a powerful doorway, and they will use any crisis, real or fabricated, to push you toward reopening that door. They need to create urgency that pressures you to respond before you think, because if you think, you'll remember why you chose distance. If emotional chaos doesn't work, they may resort to social chaos. They may try to turn people against you, spread misinformation, or act like the victim in your absence. They may portray you as cold, selfish, or disloyal, all to draw sympathy from others and corner you into defending yourself. They want to create a world where your silence becomes uncomfortable, where you feel compelled to speak just to clear your name. This is a calculated move. They know your values, they know your desire for truth, and they know your reputation matters to you. By attacking it, they hope to force you into breaking your silence. It's not about the truth, it's about regaining access. Other times, the chaos is purely emotional sabotage. They may post things online that feel directed at you, knowing you'll see them. They may flaunt new relationships, pretend they've moved on, or act as if life has never been better. This is an illusion crafted to trigger jealousy, insecurity, or curiosity. They want you to question your decision, to wonder if you made a mistake, to feel the pull of their world again. They create emotional noise because they know silence makes them powerless, and they can't allow that. They want to disturb your inner balance because your balance means freedom, and your freedom means their influence is gone. All of this chaos stems from one truth. A narcissist cannot handle losing psychological access to you. Your silence exposes their lack of control, and chaos becomes their desperate attempt to regain it. They hope that by shaking the ground beneath you, you will return to the familiar, even if the familiar was toxic. They hope that by overwhelming your emotions, they can weaken your boundaries. They want to confuse you enough that you forget the reality of who they are. They rely on unpredictability because unpredictability is their strongest tool. When life becomes loud, chaotic, or emotionally intense, they gain power. When life becomes quiet, stable, and clear, you gain power. That is why they fear your silence and respond with chaos, because chaos is their way of pulling you back into the place where your peace becomes secondary and their presence becomes central. When you stop talking to a narcissist, they refuse to end the interaction quietly. They refuse to let the story close, because closure is something they cannot tolerate. Your silence becomes an unfinished sentence in their mind, a door left half open, and they cannot handle not being in control of how you feel or what you think about them. This is when they begin their cycle of manipulative attempts, a familiar pattern designed to wear you down, confuse your boundaries, and bring you back into their emotional orbit. They cannot accept that you have mentally checked out, so they try everything in their power to pull you back. And they start with the tactics that once worked on you. Every message, every call, every action they take is part of a calculated effort to break your silence and restore their influence over you. At first, they may choose the soft approach. They reach out pretending to be gentle, understanding, or self-reflective. They may send a message filled with warmth and nostalgia, reminding you of past moments or things you once shared. They may say they've been thinking deeply, that they realize their mistakes, or that they want to talk things through calmly. This is not real accountability. It's an attempt to open the door you closed. They know how to mimic sincerity, how to sound vulnerable, how to play the part of someone who suddenly understands. But beneath the surface lies the same intention: to reestablish control. They want your attention back, not because they value your feelings, but because they cannot handle the absence of them. If the gentle approach doesn't work, they shift techniques. They may suddenly become overly affectionate or begin love-bombing you again. They flood you with compliments, promises, or emotional declarations that feel intense and overwhelming. They may say things like, "No one knows me like you do," or "I can't live without you," or "I have changed for real this time." These statements are not expressions of love. They are manipulative strategies. Narcissists use emotional exaggeration to create a sense of urgency and obligation. They want you to feel responsible for their well-being. They want you to doubt your decision and question whether walking away was the right choice. Love bombing is a familiar mask they put on whenever they fear losing control, and they hope you will fall for the same pattern you've seen before. When affection doesn't pull you back, they switch to guilt. This is where their manipulation becomes more direct, more pointed. They may accuse you of being heartless, cold, or disloyal. They may highlight all the things they claim they did for you, twisting the narrative to make it seem like you owe them something. They want you to feel guilty for choosing peace, guilty for creating distance, guilty for prioritizing your mental and emotional well-being. Narcissists know that empathy is your strength, and they try to weaponize it against you. They want you to feel uncomfortable with your silence so that you break it out of guilt rather than desire. If guilt doesn't work, they shift into a darker tone. They may become angry, demanding, or accusing. They may suddenly blame you for everything that has gone wrong. They twist the story so that they become the victim and you become the villain. They create a distorted narrative where your silence is portrayed as cruelty, immaturity, or betrayal. This tactic is meant to push you into responding defensively. They know that if they can make you defend yourself, they have successfully broken your silence. It doesn't matter whether your response is calm or emotional. The moment you speak, they feel the power returning to them. If none of these attempts work, they may attack your character behind your back. They may go to friends, family, or mutual acquaintances and tell exaggerated stories about you. They twist the truth, leave out context, and create narratives that make them appear innocent. They do this because they want to trap you in a social corner where you feel pressure to respond. They hope you will break your silence just to correct the lies they spread. They know that your integrity matters to you, and they use it as a tool to force your reaction. This tactic is not about destroying your reputation. It's about destabilizing your peace so that you step back into their world to fix the mess they created. At times, a narcissist may even pretend to be indifferent. They act like they don't care, like your silence means nothing, like they've moved on effortlessly. But this is another manipulation. They want you to feel confused, to wonder why they're so calm, to doubt your importance. They want to trigger insecurity by pretending that losing you didn't shake them. This is their way of trying to regain control through psychological reverse manipulation. But behind this facade, they watch your every move, waiting for a sign that their act is working. Each phase of this cycle is designed to break your boundaries, not honor them. Every attempt is rooted in entitlement, not love. They do not seek reconnection, they seek dominance. They do not seek healing, they seek access. They do not seek mutual respect, they seek emotional supply. And because they fear losing their hold on you, they move from one tactic to the next, hoping that one of them will pierce your silence and reopen the emotional door they once walked through so easily. When you stop talking to a narcissist, they experience something they cannot tolerate, an interruption in their supply. Narcissists do not build their self-worth from within. They extract it from the people around them. Your attention, your reactions, your empathy, your presence. These were all sources of emotional fuel that kept their ego inflated. When that supply is suddenly cut off, they don't simply sit in the silence and reflect. They immediately begin searching for a replacement, because without someone to validate them, admire them, or feed their sense of superiority, they feel exposed and empty. This emptiness is something they avoid at all costs. So instead of turning inward, they turn outward, looking for someone else to fill the space you once filled. They move quickly, impulsively, and often carelessly because their priority is not genuine connection but instant validation. They may seek out someone they once kept in the background, a friend, an ex, a coworker, someone who has always given them a certain level of admiration. Narcissists maintain backup sources of validation for this very reason. They rarely rely on just one person because they know the moment that person pulls away, they would be left powerless. So they return to these individuals with intensity, pretending to be affectionate, supportive, or invested in a way that seems sudden and dramatic. This is not because they suddenly care. It is because they desperately need someone to fill the void your silence created. They will mirror the same behaviors they use with you: charm, flattery, attention, and a sense of urgency, because they know these tactics work quickly on people who haven't yet seen their true nature. Sometimes they seek validation not from individuals but from crowds. They might become more active on social media, posting pictures, quotes, or achievements that make them appear happy, successful, admired, or desired. They may post romantic content with someone new, or they might begin showcasing a lifestyle full of excitement and joy. This is not genuine happiness, it is performance. They want you and everyone else to see how irrelevant you have become, how easily they have replaced your presence, how unaffected they are by your silence. But beneath the surface, everything they're doing stems from the same anxiety. They need constant praise, attention, or admiration to maintain the illusion they've built around themselves. Your silence threatens that illusion, so they exaggerate their life externally to hide their internal panic. They might also surround themselves with people who are easily impressed, easily manipulated, or eager to please. Narcissists are drawn to individuals who do not challenge them, who don't see through their facade, and who are willing to offer admiration without questioning motives. These new sources of validation become temporary emotional bandages. The narcissist may act overly confident or affectionate with them, but the intention is not connection, it is extraction. They want admiration, praise, or emotional attention to patch the wound created by your absence. They do not care about the emotional consequences for the new people involved. To them, these relationships are tools, not commitments. They are placeholders, not partnerships. The speed with which they jump to someone new often shocks the people who once believed in their affection. But this speed reveals something important about their emotional capacity. They do not form deep attachments, they form dependencies. Their interest in someone is not based on love but on utility. The moment you stop serving their emotional needs, they quickly search for someone else who can. And the faster they find someone new, the more loudly it shows how little they understand loyalty, depth, or emotional responsibility. They do not take time to heal, reflect, or understand. They simply transfer their neediness onto someone else, because self-reflection would require acknowledging their flaws, something they desperately avoid. Even while they pursue new sources of validation, they remain aware of you. They keep track of whether you're watching, whether you notice, whether you react. If they sense that their attempts to replace you are reaching you emotionally, they feel victorious. They want you to see how quickly they can move on, not because they've moved on, but because they want to make you feel replaceable. They aim to trigger jealousy, insecurity, or regret. These emotions are powerful for them because if you feel any of them, they believe you are still emotionally tied to them. And as long as you are tied, they believe they can regain control whenever they choose. But here's the deeper truth. Even as they seek validation elsewhere, the new supply never satisfies them for long. It may give them a temporary boost, but soon they begin craving more. They compare the new person to you, not because they loved you, but because they are trying to measure the strength of their new source of validation. They assess whether this new person can provide the same level of emotional engagement you once did. And if the new person falls short, they either discard them or move on to another. This cycle repeats endlessly, because no amount of attention will ever fill the emptiness inside a narcissist. Your silence did not create that emptiness, it merely exposed it. This constant search for validation shows how fragile their inner world truly is. They cannot sit alone with themselves without feeling insignificant. They cannot tolerate emotional independence from others because their identity depends on external reactions. So they chase admiration, affection, attention, or desire wherever they can find it, hoping temporarily to mask their internal instability. They move from person to person, moment to moment, validation to validation, never realizing that the peace they seek can never be found outside themselves. And while they run in circles searching for someone else to fill the void, your silence remains the one thing they cannot control, the one thing that reminds them of the power they lost, the one thing that exposes the truth they spend their lives avoiding, that their worth depends entirely on who they can convince to give it to them. When you stop talking to a narcissist, their ego doesn't simply bruise, it fractures. Because to them, silence is not just absence, it is exposure. It exposes the gap between who they believe they are and who they truly are. It exposes their inability to take responsibility. It exposes the truth that their carefully constructed image is fragile and dependent on how others see them. And because they cannot accept this reality, they begin rewriting the story to protect their self-image. They reshape events, twist conversations, and rearrange memories until they become the hero and you become the problem. This rewriting is not an occasional mistake. It is a psychological defense mechanism that they rely on whenever they feel threatened. They cannot survive accountability, so they reinvent a version of the story where they are right, innocent, misunderstood, or attacked unfairly. The moment they sense they're losing control of how others perceive them, they rewrite the narrative to maintain their illusion of perfection. They tell themselves lies they can believe, lies that validate their ego and silence any internal discomfort. They may tell themselves you're overreacting, that you're dramatic, that you're unstable, or that you're the one who caused every issue. They cannot allow the idea that you walked away because of their actions, so they twist the truth until it becomes something they can live with. This is why they may paint themselves as the victim, insisting they were the one mistreated, ignored, or abandoned. They need to feel justified. They need to feel superior. And they need a story that saves them from facing the reality of their own behavior. They don't just rewrite the story in their mind, they rewrite it publicly. They share their version with anyone who will listen. Friends, family, co-workers, or anyone who can be persuaded. They shift the narrative so smoothly and confidently that people who don't know the truth may believe them. They portray you as cold or unreasonable, claiming they tried everything and you gave them nothing back. They may say they were supportive, loyal, or patient while you were difficult or ungrateful. The goal is not to hurt you. Hurting you is just a side effect. The real goal is protecting their image at all costs. They need people to see them the way they see themselves, flawless, admirable, innocent, and superior. If someone challenges their version of the story or expresses doubt, they escalate the rewriting. They add details that never existed, exaggerate your flaws, or invent scenarios that put you in a negative light. Narcissists are skilled storytellers because they practice deception their entire lives. They carefully select words that paint them as noble or deeply wounded, while subtly implying that you were unreasonable or emotionally volatile. They need a narrative that keeps them on top, and they will stretch the truth as far as necessary to achieve it. This story doesn't only target other people, it targets you. If they have any access to you, even through mutual connections, they use their rewritten story to plant seeds of doubt. They hope you hear their version and feel misunderstood. They hope you begin questioning your memory, wondering if maybe you were too harsh, too emotional, or too quick to walk away. They want you to second-guess your truth because your confidence threatens them. If they can rewrite the story in a way that makes you doubt your decisions, they regain influence over your emotional world. They want to shake your certainty, because certainty is a kind of freedom they cannot allow you to keep. In private, they rewrite the story to avoid responsibility. In public, they rewrite the story to maintain admiration. And in your mind, they attempt to rewrite the story so you forget why you left in the first place. They do this because accountability is unbearable to them. Admitting fault would mean facing the parts of themselves they cannot tolerate. Their ego is too fragile to accept blame, too sensitive to handle guilt, and too unstable to process criticism. To protect themselves, they create narratives where you were impossible to satisfy or unwilling to listen, where they did their best and you gave up too easily. These stories keep their ego intact while destroying the truth. Their rewriting also reveals something important. They need a version of the story where they still matter. They want to be central in your narrative, even after you stop talking to them. By twisting events, they ensure that the story still revolves around them, even if it's a distorted version. They would rather be the victim than be insignificant. They would rather be wrong than forgotten. This is why they cling to their rewritten story so tightly. They need a role that keeps them relevant. Even when evidence contradicts their claims, they continue rewriting. They convince themselves the lies are true because the truth is too painful to face. They need to feel morally superior, emotionally stronger, and intellectually above everyone else, and rewriting the story gives them this illusion. They cannot accept that you saw through them, that you recognized the manipulation, or that you walked away out of strength rather than weakness. So they rewrite the story until you become the ungrateful one, the cold one, the unreasonable one, the one who misunderstood everything. This rewriting never ends. It becomes the version they tell themselves at night. It becomes the version they tell others to gain sympathy. It becomes the version they use to justify every future action. And it becomes the version they hope will eventually reach you and make you question your truth. They rebuild their identity with this rewritten story because without it, they would have to face what your silence already revealed, that their behavior drove you away, that their control slipped out of their hands, that their ego was not as untouchable as they believed, and that their illusion shattered the moment you stopped giving it life. When you reach the point where you stop responding, where you finally decide that your silence is more powerful than your explanations, something begins to shift on a level the narcissist never expected. They built their entire dynamic with you on the belief that you would always be available, always emotionally accessible, always willing to respond, defend, justify, or explain yourself. And suddenly, the silence you choose disrupts that entire system. They don't understand silence the way healthy people do. They experience it as a direct threat to their sense of control. This is why the moment you stop talking, the narcissist's mind goes into overdrive trying to figure out how to pull you back into the cycle they crafted. They might begin by convincing themselves that you're exaggerating, that you'll eventually come back, that this is just a temporary phase. But even while they tell themselves these things, a deeper fear begins to brew inside them, a fear they never admit but always carry, the fear of losing their grip on the person who fed their ego so consistently. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever did. It breaks the rhythm they depended on. In that silence, they lose the audience they needed to validate their actions, their opinions, and their superficial sense of superiority. They start to feel the emptiness that they usually avoid through manipulation and distraction. And instead of reflecting on their behavior, which they almost never do, they start strategizing how to pull you back. The first strategy is often subtle. They might send a casual message to test your reaction, something neutral, something that doesn't reveal their anxiety but is intended to gauge whether you're still reachable. If they receive no response, the energy inside them shifts again. They start to feel offense, as if your silence is a personal attack. It bruises their ego because they believe they deserve attention simply for existing in your life. The thought that you're choosing not to engage becomes unbearable to them, and it pushes them to escalate their attempts. That escalation can take many forms. They may suddenly act overly friendly, sending messages dripping with warmth and nostalgia, trying to recreate the version of themselves they used during the initial love bombing phase. They know exactly what they once used to draw you in, and they know how powerful those memories can be. They might remind you of inside jokes, shared dreams, or promises they never kept. They do this not out of genuine affection, but because they know you once responded to that softness. When that doesn't work, they may switch tactics abruptly. The same person who was acting tender may become cold or accusing, blaming you for the silence, trying to guilt trip you into replying. They want to provoke you emotionally because emotional reactions give them the opening they need to re-enter your life. They don't care whether the reaction is positive or negative. They care only that you react. If guilt doesn't work, they may move toward a different type of manipulation, creating chaos or manufacturing a crisis. They might pretend they're hurt, sick, or in trouble. They might say they urgently need to talk. They may even pretend something dramatic has happened just to provoke concern from you. They know that you're empathetic, that your heart is soft, and they try to exploit that compassion as a way back into the conversation. When even that fails, their frustration grows deeper. They may begin talking to people around you, trying to gather information, trying to create a narrative that makes them look like the victim and you look like the unreasonable one. They may tell others that you're ignoring them unfairly, that you're overreacting, that you're being dramatic. They do this to reclaim the sense of control they lost when you stopped responding. If they can't control you, they try to control the story about you. And while all this is happening externally, internally, there's another battle going on. Your silence confronts them with a truth they spend their entire lives running from. They do not have the power they believed they had. They are not as irreplaceable as they told themselves. They are not as admired as they want to be perceived. They are not as significant in your life as they demanded to be. Your silence becomes a mirror they cannot escape, reflecting their insecurity, their fragility, and their dependence on the very validation they pretend not to need. And they hate that mirror. They try to break it by pulling you back into conversation, but every moment you remain silent makes the reflection sharper, clearer, more undeniable. Silence does something else too. It forces them to experience consequences for the first time. They've spent their whole existence avoiding accountability, shifting blame, twisting narratives, and manipulating emotions so that they never have to face themselves. But when you stop engaging, when you step out of the cycle, they lose the ability to deflect. They can't redirect the narrative because you're not participating in it anymore. They can't distort your emotions because you're no longer giving them access to your emotional world. They can't use your empathy as a tool because you've withdrawn it from the equation. And that loss, for them, feels like suffocation. They might try one last tactic, the dramatic exit. They might act like they don't care, like your silence doesn't bother them at all. They might post things online to make themselves look happy, successful, or unaffected. They might even pretend they've moved on. But this too is a performance, an attempt to provoke a reaction or at least protect their fragile ego from the reality that you are no longer feeding it. Deep down, they're watching, waiting, hoping for even the smallest sign that their image has reached you and affected you. Because in the end, silence is not just the absence of communication, it is the presence of power. And when you choose that power, when you step out of the role they assigned you, the narcissist finds themselves fighting a battle they never prepared for, a battle against the one thing they cannot manipulate, control, or overpower: your decision to disengage.